Hello, hello. Welcome to another Unlapped because it is another week. Laurence Edmondson is here. I'm Nicole Briscoe. Laz, my voice has been, what's a word that I can say? Not amazing all week, but like it's sort of better today. I still feel like, but I feel like it's come around just in time for our weekly visit. Remember, Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Let's get the business out of the way to begin with. Remember, if you're watching with your eyeballs on the ESPN YouTube channel, the ESPN F1 channel is where you can get our F1 content all season long, all year round, 365 days a year, because that's how the calendar works. Also, if you're watching or listening to us someplace else, great, awesome. Just like, subscribe, give us a 5-star review. Just make sure that you're back every single week. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I wasn't in Baku. I wasn't in Monza, so I'm actually slightly missing racetracks, but I am heading off to Singapore in a week's time, so I'll get my fill then. But hey, it was still entertaining, even watching from the couch and, well, behind the laptop screen for me still, but still an entertaining weekend, I
It
thought.
was a hugely entertaining weekend. Also, I'm noticing that so it's my right, so your left. The little tiny bit of chipmunk cheek left over from the wisdom teeth has been fully removed now. Now you're like normal. How you feel?
Yeah, feeling much better as well in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, I was struggling to speak last week because, yeah, the wisdom tooth removal,
Yeah.
and then I'll have to take the lion's share this week if your voice gives
That's
out. But
fine.
so far, sounding
I'll
good.
just I'll just go see myself out. No, I'm kidding. What was your biggest takeaway from the weekend that was Baku? Because I feel like there are so many wild elements to it. We could be here for a while.
Well, I think the big one that a lot of people were focusing on Sunday is, okay, Red Bull actually might have a competitive car going forward. There's still some big questions in my mind about that, but 2 consecutive wins in a row and 2 very convincing consecutive wins in a row is impressive. Meanwhile, we saw how quickly things can unravel, even for someone as cool, calm, and collected as Oscar Piastri. I mean, I think we've spoken so many times on this podcast about how that guy just gets results no matter what. Well, this weekend
This
in
was not that
Baku,
weekend.
it all went wrong. And so, yeah, that was two things that actually do slightly change the picture going into the final 7 races. Maybe a little bit too little, too late for Red Bull, but I'm sure we'll talk about that.
It feels like a little bit of like cracks in the armor for McLaren, but also let's just go with Max because there were a
Yeah.
couple of things that I thought I say like he could drive a shoebox. So with his recent form, there was a large part of me that thought, oh, this is just Max being Max. But then if you throw Yuki's performance in from this weekend, that was the thing that made me realize, wait a minute, maybe this isn't just all Max. Maybe Red Bull is also heading sort of in the right direction. S- Like, so what is it? Is it Max? Is it the team? Is it a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of a few things. I think some of it is definitely coming from Max because for the first time this season, he's talking about how the car actually feels reasonably balanced. And remember, if we go back to even Suzuka, where he took that amazing pole position and the victory throughout that weekend, he was saying how the car just felt, well, like a shoebox, as you so uh, nicely put it. But now it seems like they've unlocked something, they found something. It's not entirely clear whether this is purely setup driven, although they definitely have settled on a setup that Max likes. And it's not clear how much is coming from the floor upgrade that was introduced in Monza, but that's the kind of thing that could make a big difference with the balance of the car and how it feels. But the big question going forward is, okay, you can do it on Monza and Baku where the wings are trimmed back. We've seen throughout this season, as we've built trends of where cars are quick and where they aren't, we've seen that the Red Bull has been slightly better behaved when the wings are trimmed back. But when the full downforce goes on, they really struggle to get that balance working in the same way. And also through longer duration corners. So think Budapest, where you got those long sweeping corners, that's where the car just starts to lose performance because it can't be balanced in throughout the length of that corner. And therefore, time is just ticking away, even in Max Verstappen's hands when he's going through that corner. So that's a big question going forward because Singapore, next race, is high downforce. But I think even if they lose some of that performance, it's still a step they've made, and Max still feels more comfortable. And that has got McLaren worried, even on Saturday night when Andrea Stella was asked about whether Max has become a threat for the title. And this was before he cut the gap on Sunday. He said yes. And he said, put it in capitals in your copy. Yes, YES. So McLaren are convinced, but I think it is probably all a little bit too late. because it's still 69 points. And
But
I
at
mean,
this
we've both
point
been watching
last
this
year,
for a while. That's a lot.
but at this point last year, that was essentially the gap between Lando and Max. And we were looking at Max like, oh, wait, here's what he could do. Here's what he needs to do. Here's what Lando could do. So we've taken the situation that we were in last year and essentially just reversed it. The difference is, I think the mindset. Also, the difference is Max has won 4 championships. The McLaren drivers, put it that way, have not. And I think there is a mental toughness. It's difficult sometimes when you're trying to learn to win, as opposed to the situation where the McLaren drivers have been in the last handful of years. So I almost look at Max's title fight now as being more legitimate than what maybe Lando's was a season ago.
Yeah, from a driver perspective, I agree. If there's a driver who's going to get the maximum out of a car for seven
Like
consecutive
blood in
races,
the water,
I
don't look past him.
yeah, exactly. With the pressure on, I think Max is the only driver probably on the grid who can get the maximum out of the car for seven consecutive races. However, the car is my concern there because what we had last year was McLaren clearly with a much faster car, clearly with the momentum behind them, and Red Bull really, really struggling to get things together, even in Max's hands. Whereas the issues that McLaren faced in Baku, okay, they probably weren't as fast as Max, but they weren't that far off. The issues were coming from elsewhere. And while they may well still drop points because issues come from the drivers, I think, when we get to Singapore, USA, Mexico, in those 3 races, those are 3 races where I would expect the McLaren to be the faster car again. If it is, then if that gap gets bigger, if it goes beyond 69 points over those 3 races, forget it. Not even Max Verstappen can turn that around.
Yeah, but hold on. All I'm going to say is just for argument's sake, he's 69 points back. Verstappen's taken 35 points out of Piastri's lead in 2 races. So 69 is, if you look at the last 2 races, 69 is nothing.
That's true. That's true. But it does rely on this guy that we were talking about earlier making more mistakes. There's metronomic Oscar Piastri.
I know, I know.
I like there's a little bit where you see Baku and you think, okay, that we could extrapolate that down the line. But I actually think Oscar will bounce back from that. I think he's got the mental strength to do so. And then if you look at it another way, to pitch the other side of the argument, well, 69 points over 7 races, that's 10 points per race weekend. Now, if Max goes and wins every race, sure, but Oscar would still have to finish third or worse every race. There's some sprints involved, so it's not quite as clean as that. But I just can't see Oscar throwing away that opportunity. But hey, look, this is F1, and the great thing is weird things do happen. And when the pressure gets cranked up, even stranger things happen. And I guess that's the big unknown going into this final stage of the season is that Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, neither of them have really been in a title fight where they've been chased down since they were in junior formulas, at least. They've not done it in F1. So with that extra pressure on, will we see more mistakes from Piastri and Norris? But yeah, I just think the mountain is a little bit too high for Verstappen. But hey, look, I'd love to be proved wrong. If I am, play this back at the end of the season and I'll take it on the chin.
Let's just enjoy it. Honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
when the championship is close, it's better for all of us because it's more enjoyable to watch. Also, I'm here for the chaos because I mean, I always root for the chaos. I'm always like, give me a race where there's rain. Give me a race where there's a tire situation. Give me a race where there's strategy. And that's what we had all weekend in Baku. The crazy thing, admittedly, with my Sports Center hours, this particular race weekend was really hard for me to watch live. Like qualifying was at 4 a.m. and I think I got done with work at 2 a.m. I didn't work Saturday night, but I feel like just recycled trash from the raccoon panda, or I just feel awful. So I didn't get up to watch the race at 7 o'clock in the morning on Sunday when I was going to have to work until 2:30 in the morning on Sunday. So
You are forgiven for that. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think, yeah, so I watched it all afterwards, or via what you guys wrote. Um, I I think you can go back and you can look at some of those results and say, well, would that person have finished where they did had Piastri not made the mistake that he did? Would that person have finished where they did if Lando I didn't have the slow pit stop? And you can if then till the cows come home. But what we ended up with was probably one of the most entertaining race weekends on the whole. Qualifying took what, 30 minutes longer than last year's
It
race?
Yeah, probably did actually. Yeah, I was gonna say it's 2 hours of qualifying, so doubled its usual window.
That's bananas. There were six red flags just in qualifying. You
A
had a,
record for qualifying.
what was that?
That was a record as well for qualifying.
Right. You
Five
had
record.
a very interesting lineup. And then in the race, you had alternate strategy, the overcut from George Williams. Sorry, from George Russell to get the Williams. You had Williams on the pole, which how many times? Wait, because what was your bold prediction? I forget what it was. We were like, what is the boldest?
I had Kimi Antonelli winning a race, which even in Baku didn't look that likely.
No,
However,
and I was like, Williams is going to win a race, but when they're second and hanging on to the podium, I'm like, wait, hold on. Hold on. Maybe it's not so wild. Maybe it's not so crazy. But in terms of race weekends, my biggest takeaway from that is like, yes, that was hugely entertaining. Even if Max gapped the field by an awful lot in the end, there were just so many unknowns and so many interesting things happening in the field that I was like, just give me more of that. I'll take more of that for the rest of the season.
yeah, it was one of those races where at any point you thought this could all just blow up with a safety car as well. I mean, weird in the end that the only safety car came from Oscar's mistake at the start.
Right.
But throughout, yeah, you thought, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And that has to be involved in strategy. And so there were a lot of guessing. The one strange thing about it actually was that overtaking was not easy. We've seen in Baku before that as long as you get that exit out of turn 16, that final corner onto the 2 kilometer flat out, not quite straight, but flat out section across the finish line, then you have a chance to overtake into turn one. That didn't really come about as much, but that did create some tense situations. And, that is kind of what allowed Carlos to get, do so well, hold on to position. It's what allowed Liam Lawson to be so effective throughout that race, is that it wasn't that easy to overtake. So, but despite that, I still think it was a gripping race. But I agree. I mean, qualifying, you just had no idea. And you know what? We're talking about what ifs and all of that kind of stuff. I think the biggest one from the weekend was Lando Norris, who, after Piastri had crashed in Q3, was the first car back out on track. And the track was still a little bit damp and no cars had run over it. So he had the worst track conditions of all the drivers going out in Q3. And it was almost like McLaren were being cautious there. But in order for him to overcome that caution and get a decent lap, then he had to push extra hard. And that's where he made mistakes. And so it was just this crazy situation, crazy track conditions where anything could happen throughout it. And so, yeah, but then the one thing that maybe we shouldn't be surprised by is that the guy who comes out on top is the guy who always seems to get it right, no matter what, Max Verstappen. But I mean, great to see Max genuinely competitive again, because, I really do. It's a shame when he's held back by the car, he's not anymore by the looks of it.
When you look at McLaren, and obviously one of the things that we haven't yet sort of addressed was last weekend in Baku was the first weekend that they had the chance to actually clinch the Constructors' Championship. For a multitude of reasons, that did not happen. And then their disastrous weekend for both the drivers. How much of that is sometimes you just have a bad weekend? And how much of that is them, because you mentioned them, playing it safe in qualifying. When you try to play prevent, sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you give up points. So how much of that is McLaren trying to play it safe, playing prevent, and then just getting championship jitters?
Yeah, I think there was a bit of that. Certainly with with Lando. Once Oscar had crashed and they had one car out, they were very conservative with the way they ran Q3 for Lando, and that meant that he started further back. But you can't like really dress it up any other way. The Piastri's weekend was on him. It was 3 errors throughout the weekend. There was a crash in qualifying. There was a jump start, which led to him going to the back of the field into turn 1. And then there was the obvious mistake at turn 5 that took him out of the race. I don't think McLaren did anything wrong there. That was all on Oscar. Surprising and also weird that he managed to get all of his errors up to this point of the season out in one go. The only other major one I can think of was Australia, and maybe the mistake with the restart at Silverstone where he got the penalty. But apart from that, he's just been so consistent. And so it seemed like once one thing went wrong, it all just unraveled. And then, I do agree with you on Norris's weekend. And, even that pit stop, that not going right, it costing a potential opportunity to get 2 more places. Okay, that's only 5th place on a weekend when your title rivals in the wall. You should be, at least be on the podium if you're driving a McLaren, but still 5th place would have been an extra 4 points, I believe, and therefore that would have been that little bit closer in the championship. So, yeah, I do think there was a bit of that, especially with Lando. Just like when the pressure's on, when he needed to get it done, it's just little errors crept in, and then perhaps they went just too conservative with running a Q3.
Um, who do you think was more disappointing at the end of the day? And I'm going to tell you this, I actually think it was Lando. But I'm curious what you think. I think Lando had the more disappointing weekend because second week in a row, there was the big issue for him was almost team related. Putting him out there when they did in qualifying wasn't putting him in the best situation. The slow pit stop, again, didn't do anything to help him. And this was an opportunity for him to make up ground on the teammate who made a mistake. Lando has made mistakes. I'm not going to look at him and be like, yeah, he's been perfect. That's not true. But the mistakes or the issues that he had this weekend felt a little more like they were team related and less him. So this was the weekend where he could have made up significant ground. Yes, he still cut into the lead, but he finished 7th. He should have finished at least 5th, if not better. So for me, I just think when this title fight is over, and let's say Lando doesn't win it and Oscar does, there are a couple of key weekends that he's going to look back on and be like, man, that's the weekend it got away. It feels like this last weekend in Baku was one of them.
Yeah, I think just because it did present that opportunity to
Yeah.
him, I agree. And, I mean, I tried to defend him a little bit there with the timing of Q3, and I do think that McLaren played that too conservatively, but that's easy to say with the benefit of hindsight. If he'd gone and got a clean lap, then he probably would have been a little bit further up. That would have reduced some issues in the race. So I think he will look back at this and wonder. However, I mean, if Norris does go and win this championship, then Piastri's going to look back at the Baku weekend and be like, well, that was the only big fat zero on my first 17 races. What happened there? And then also, what we don't know at this stage is whether Piastri does just bounce back straight away in Singapore. I suspect he will, but who knows? Like I said, we haven't yet seen him in this position. What if this leads to more errors? What if it gets in his head? But yeah, I think because of the way the championship is set up at the moment, this felt like such a big opportunity for Norris. And that's why when they left on Sunday night, I think Piastri probably looked at it and said, okay, I messed up. That was all on me. But hey, I kind of got lucky that I only lost 6 points. Whereas Norris is going to look at it and be like, wow, that was a golden opportunity. Even if he couldn't compete with Max, just to get 18 points out of Piastri would have been huge for the championship. So I got to agree with you. In terms of just pure disappointment leaving Baku, Norris is undoubtedly feeling more. I mean, this was put to him as well. And he said that actually, you could look at that across all of my races. Every race I don't win, I didn't compete, I didn't go at my very best and I didn't get the
The
maximum
PC
out of it.
thing. That's what he's going to say.
But yeah, it felt like he was telling himself that even as he said it, like trying to convince himself that even as he said it. I don't think that's how anyone would have felt leaving Baku after what happened to him that weekend.
Let's get to the stat of the week. Stat of the week is brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Okay, here's the stat. Only 2 drivers in Formula One history have stood on the podium for McLaren, Ferrari, and Williams. Do you know the answer without it being in front of you?
I wouldn't have known this. I may have figured it out.
I would have figured out the one that we're talking
Given
about.
enough time.
I don't think I would have. I wouldn't have gotten the older driver.
Sure.
Okay, so it's Alain Prost and Sainz, Carlos Sainz. So he got his first podium for Williams. James Vowles got his first podium as team principal for Williams. And then here's the petty part, because everyone knows I'm here for the petty. Not only did Sainz finish on the podium, his replacement, the guy who replaced him, finished P8 at Ferrari. And he also finished ahead of the guy who replaced the guy who replaced him at Ferrari. Anyway, you got to feel good for Sainz. Also worth noting, Sainz is only one of 4 drivers ever to drive for all 3 teams, which is kind of like if you're going to go through the list of teams that you've driven for in terms of the history of the sport, not bad, not bad. it was definitely, we've had a number of feel-good stories this year. You know, like the Hulkenberg on podium, obviously, even seeing Isaac Hadjar on the podium after the way his season started and just how he has progressed as a rookie. There have been a few moments with Kimi Antonelli when Antonelli was on the podium, also when Antonelli got the sprint pole in Miami. This was another one too, because it was not that long ago that Sainz was saying, look, fans, you're not going to see me fighting for podiums this year. You're not going to see me doing that. But my goal is to take Williams in the right direction. There have been times this season where we have wondered, like, what is wrong with Carlos Sainz? Like, his form has not been, I think, what we expected to. Alex Albon has outpointed him, what, by double?
More than double, yeah.
But this was sort of, it felt like a breakthrough moment for a lot of reasons, not just for Sainz, but for the team as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it kind of set the record straight slightly on Sainz's season at Williams because prior to Baku, he was on 16 points and Albon was on 70. And Williams are still, and probably will be now, thanks to this podium, they're fifth in the Constructors' Championship. But you looked at their points and you're like, is Sainz contributing as much as he should be? And the
And
answer is
honestly, the answer has been no. There have been
yeah,
where he's made mistakes or had issues where you're like, well, that should have been
yeah.
a podium. That should have been, it shouldn't have been as hard as it was.
And the easy
Double points, not double podium.
yeah, exactly. And the easy answer to that would have been, well, he's settling into Williams and it's taking time. And there is some truth to that. But actually, if you look at his performance, his just qualifying performance versus Albon, the margin is tiny. I think it's the third smallest margin in between teammates up to Baku. And so it just didn't really fit. And so I'm glad that he finally had this weekend. And these weekends don't come around very often if you're driving in a midfield car. And that's what Sainz alluded to when he left Ferrari and saying, well, might not see the podium again for a little while. But when they do come around, you need someone who's in the zone, able to get the performance out of the car and is calm and collected. And Sainz had all of that this weekend. And I think, there's been times when one of those things has left him outside the points of various races this year, but all three were there when it mattered. And he got that podium. And I think, it is really important for him going forward because in Albon, I think he's come up against a teammate that, a few people were wondering whether Albon would be found out going up against Sainz. And, if you just looked at the points and not at the actual lap times, then you might have thought it was the other way. But for Sainz to prove that, he's still got it and he can still get a podium when it matters, that was very important. So, I think it's a really important result for him. And just the way he was talking about it afterwards, there was that real sense of, I'm just glad I could show you guys that actually things are going pretty well. And he talked to Karen Chandok afterwards on Sky Sports and said how he sees it as almost like his life goal now is to help Williams move forward, and really talking about the long term with Williams, which he has before, but it's never really sounded quite as convincing. And obviously, as this season went on, the results weren't coming together. You were like, well, maybe they're not quite the match that they should be. But I think Sainz has felt that throughout, and he's just wanted to prove it, and well, now he has.
But I think that's also the sort of the story arc for Williams. There have been some terribly lean years because their last podium was technically 2021, but we know the weirdness around that one with George Russell. So like their last legit podium would have been what, 2017
in Baku with Lance Stroll. Yeah, I read that
exactly.
quite recently. I know, yeah.
So like some legitimate weirdness there, some very, very lean years. And if you look at the story arc that Williams has sort of put themselves on with the changes at team principal, the changes within the team, and the idea that next year is the year they're fighting for wins and legitimately fighting to be in the top four of the constructors, it's starting to go in the right direction. They have 101 points this season, which you're like, oh, look at the top four in the championship. Yeah, that's not as much. However, that's their most since 138 in 2016. There are still 7 races to go. They could easily surpass that. But if you take a look at the points that they've scored in the last couple of years, where they are now is like outpointing the last 3 years combined. So the idea that we know that the rules are changing next year, the regulations are changing in 2026. Mercedes, the engine supplier, looks like they could be the ones, and it gives us, I think, reason to believe. Carlos said, I'm signing with Williams to take this team in the right direction. If you look at it, even without the regulation changes, it's all making sense. It's all showing that like it's maybe not that crazy. He's not going to spend his life in the back of the field.
Yeah, I feel like the gains they've made already is just getting things organized, the low-hanging fruit, the kind of stuff that probably should have been done. James Fowles has talked about it. Some of it should have been done several decades ago. And it's just getting everything organized to bring it up to the modern standards of a top-tier racing team, which of course James Fowles knows so well from his time winning titles with Mercedes. And so that just getting everything in the right place, making sure that the car is built with the right methods, because it started last season way overweight. They actually felt they missed out on quite a few points early last season because the car was just too heavy, and that's lap time right there if you can get that weight out of the car. So they started this season just with what was a well-developed, well-built car, but nothing special, because right from Vals's first moment stepping into the Williams factory in Grove in 2023, he said the target is 2026. And he did something very important, which is get everyone involved. So all the investors in the team, all of the board on the team on board with his plan of making 2026 a target. And that's what it's all been working towards. So this year, there's been very few, if any, proper upgrades to that car, because right from the moment it went out at the launch at Silverstone, I was there, and then went testing. That was it. That's the car. That's the car we're going to race with. We hope it's competitive, but it may well go backwards throughout the season as other teams outdevelop us, because all of their focus was going into 2026 and has been. And so that's what makes it exciting. Now, of course, a new set of regulations, even with all the best will in the world and all the wind tunnel time and cost cap going into a set of regulation, you can still get it wrong. But I think what gives everyone hope at Williams right now is that everything that Bowser said would happen along the way has happened, and then a little bit more. So 2026 remains still the biggest challenge they're going to face. But you're right. There's just, from what's happened so far, there's this belief actually that, well, maybe this could happen. And maybe when Sainz had that choice between realistically Sauber, which is becoming Audi, Alpine and Williams, because both Red Bull and Mercedes kind of gave him the cold shoulder, it's starting to look more and more like he made the right choice. But, it's easy to say that after a podium, isn't it? Things change in a very quick amount of time in Formula One, but it is starting to look like that was the right decision.
Things change quickly, unless you're Ferrari.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like we've beaten this topic into the ground. It's like beating the dead horse at this point. It was just another uninspired weekend, another race where you just expect more. And I realize I'm expecting more because it's Ferrari. And yes, I'm expecting more because it's Lewis Hamilton, but like I don't I don't even know what to say anymore other than they're there. The cars are on the track. Do we just not pay attention to them anymore? And this is about 2026. Like I'm sort of over it.
Yeah, it was very disappointing. It had lots of parallels to the McLaren weekend in terms of underperformance.
Yeah.
Leclerc putting it in the wall in Q3. Lewis didn't even make Q3 because the timing of the way Q2 played out, he basically stayed on the same tires for too long and then didn't have what he needed when it came to setting the lap at the end of the session. And so, but these are operational errors. Okay, the car probably wasn't or isn't as quick as it should be, no doubt about that. But these are all operational errors, and yeah, it is slightly worrying that even with the car being where it is and the problems they've had from the start of the year about not being able to run it at the right height that it was really designed for, and these baked in issues that they were probably never going to get out of, considering the regulation change next year, cost cap, limited wind tunnel time. They were probably stuck in this throughout. It's just, they're not maximizing what they've got either. And I think what hurts most of all, if you're a Ferrari fan, is that you go into each weekend and in practice, they actually look pretty good. In Monza, they look quite quick in practice. In Baku, they look quite quick in practice. And then it all just falls apart when it matters. I think, that's not entirely operational errors. That's also because they seem to run the car either slightly lighter or with a higher engine mode in practice than their rivals. But even so, it just feels like it's just not coming together. And weirdly, Lewis, who, these are not the results that Lewis is ever going to remember, when he's sitting down the line, retired, and talking to his grandchildren about his time racing in Formula One. He's not going to remember these eighth places with Ferrari. But actually, I'd say the last few races, he's the only person at Ferrari who seems to be kind of making a little bit of progress because he's just got a little bit closer to Leclerc. So if you are looking for any kind of green shoots of recovery and optimism for 2026, if you're a Lewis Hamilton fan, you might be able to take a bit out of that. But undoubtedly, the wider issues here is that the car isn't quick enough. And even when it looks reasonably fast, they're making little errors along the way as well.
The best part of the weekend too was watching the road trip. The road trip that Leclerc
Yes.
and Sainz had to do.
Yeah.
Like that was funny. If you've missed it, Leclerc posted it on his Instagram and he's like, just to add to a terrible weekend. And he's like in the car and he pans the camera. They're like in some van in the middle of
Yeah.
Italy because they were diverted. They couldn't land in Nice, so they were just driving home from the middle of Italy to Monaco. And what is like we all do it when the GPS says it's going to take you an hour and a half, you're like, really? Is it going to take me an hour and a half? No, it's going to take me an hour 25. They were trying to like shave a half hour off of it,
Yeah.
but one, relatable, two, funny, liked it. Um, what are other takeaways from the week? I mean, Liam Lawson had his best weekend. Yuki Tsunoda also put together a decent weekend. Um, what am I missing?
No, I think we should dwell on those a little bit because that all feeds into what Red Bull are doing with their drivers next year. And one of the big questions is, would Yuki, be allowed to stay? Would he be
Right.
part of the plans going forward? And it sounds very much like he has until Austin, Mexico time to impress the team. Now, that's the race that's just happened in Baku, Singapore, and then we're into Austin, Mexico. So he has a very limited amount of time, but did appear to make a minor breakthrough as well. Like you said at the top of the show, Max was very quick, but Yuki actually looks a little bit quicker as well. So I'm hopeful maybe for Yuki's sake that Singapore can go well, and then he is in a position where he's impressing the team down the line to be able to stay within the fold. Because I still don't think, I think it'd be such a shame for his career to end at the end of this year. But then another driver with pressure on him, especially if Yuki starts doing well, is Liam. And Liam had a fantastic race, fantastic qualifying as well, qualifying P3 behind Sainz, and then really I think given where that car is, had a fantastic race trying to battle with the Mercedes, but then ultimately keep Ferraris and McLarens behind him is impressive. So I think those are very noteworthy performances. And then, the guy that we keep talking about, Isaac Hadjar, still kept it in the points. He was very upset with his qualifying lap because he had got caught by a gust of wind coming out of turn 16, I think, and it all kind of just got away from him at the last proper corner of the track. But that guy keeps getting results, getting the points.
So
And
consistent.
yeah, I mean, the only thing that, the one thing that people said about Hadjar when he first came in was watch our guy's temper. He can be a little bit kind of wild and erratic sometimes over team radio. And I think he's actually done a fairly good job at controlling that. But if you go back and watch his, this is how much it meant to him though. If you go back and watch his qualifying lap, as he came out of turn 16, he was slamming the steering wheel with his fist because he knew he'd missed his opportunity just through a mistake there of really probably qualifying up where Lawson was. And then, maybe get another amazing result. So I think that's something that he still needs to work on slightly, is just that calmness and being collected at the right times. But I think it also shows you how much it means to him. And because he's able to be in that position, to be that close to those results, that shows you how quick he is.
But let's be honest, too. Slamming your wrist or your fist on the wheel at the end of a qualifying lap, you've already thrown it away. You're not throwing it into the wall because you're doing that. You're just
True.
expressing your emotions. I kind of don't have a problem with that because he knew it, that's him sort of living in the moment and expressing how much it means to him. But also, he's not throwing anything away. It's not like he made a mistake in the race, slams his fist on the steering wheel, and then loses six positions. And he's not abusing or berating his team on the radio. I don't really have a problem with that at all. And I also think it's interesting to look at Liam Lawson and yeah, he had a shot at the podium and it didn't turn out that way. But there is something to be said about when a driver starts to unlock that new level of confidence. And I'm not saying that the bar is set incredibly high for Liam Lawson, but considering where he was after 2 weeks of the season, to then just have the rug absolutely pulled out from under him, to be sent back down to the quote unquote junior team, and to for the majority of the season he's been on the struggle bus. To have a weekend like this, even if you look at it and say yeah but somebody else in front of him made a mistake, yeah but Lawson didn't, yeah but Lawson still put it together. I think these weekends are sometimes telling, and they're an opportunity to grow on confidence and to sort of maybe set sail in the right direction. How will he be able to build on this? Even if he goes into Singapore and doesn't have the best situation, but if he can still put it together and have a decent weekend, this is what you need to see from him, starting to head in the right direction and being able to handle sort of the ebbs and the flows of the sport, but not letting it derail you. Okay, so you had your good weekend. What can you do with it now?
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of the progress that he has made over the last few races, and a bit like Sainz, just being able to have that result you can point to at the end of it is important, especially when it comes to decisions about drivers down the line. But I think he's absolutely on the right path. He's been a little bit overshadowed by just how brilliant Hadjar's been,
Yeah.
this season, and I guess how much of a surprise that's been as well. But you're right. If you're going to look at Lawson and say, what can this guy give us, and what's his potential long term, to come back from the horror show that was being dropped by Red Bull after 2 races and find the performance in the car again is crucial. And so he's done that very well. The only other takeaway, which I'll put out there from Baku, was Mercedes getting a second place and fourth place. So George Russell, I think, again, just really performing on a high level. I think behind
While
Max right
also
now.
feeling awful, not for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had what sounded like a pretty awful throat cold. Yeah, not too dissimilar to yours, Nicole, actually.
No, I think it was probably different, but he sounded
Yeah, he was rough. He was rough
awful.
and in a bad way. So to turn around and be able to get a second place was impressive. Antonelli, of course, after all the comments made by him, by Toto Wolff coming out of Monza, to be able to put a decent weekend together was very important as well. But they also moved ahead of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship for second place.
Oh, that's
Not
right.
that anyone really cares about second place, right, in the Constructors' Championship, but there is money attached to it. And I think there's an element of pride between those, teams behind McLaren. We all know McLaren's won the Constructors, or will do very, very soon. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that battle play out, and whether Mercedes can keep that going. It was kind of Mercedes conditions, a bit cooler in Baku, kind of slightly weird track layout, low downforce like it was in Canada when they were quick as well. But yeah, interesting that there they managed to capitalize and get a decent result out of it. And while Ferrari really did struggle. So yeah, they might have their eyes on second place by the end of this year.
I think the only other news that has come out of this week, which is interesting because, well, I mean, we don't have a race this weekend. Um, Christian Horner, I'm trying to wrap my head around the monopoly money here.
Yeah.
£100 million payout from Red Bull to officially leave the company. Obviously, he's not been team principal for the latter half of the season, but he was still within the company fold. That is no longer the case because he's a bajillionaire, and now he is even more of a bajillionaire. But the interesting part about all of that is he has been paid. They've agreed to the settlement to remove him from the company. That now means that Horner, can return to the sport as early as the spring of 2026. So let's read between the lines. Let's read the tea leaves. What do we know now?
Well, yes, I mean, he had a contract with Red Bull through to 2030. So once Red Bull had decided that they didn't want him as team principal anymore, which was obviously earlier this year, they then had to negotiate this payout. And there's differing figures. I mean, they're all monopoly money,
Yeah.
but some people are suggesting it's more like $60 million.
Oh,
Uh,
no.
the figure we got was $100 million. I mean,
Is that dollars or pounds?
that's still a huge amount. So
Wait, is it dollars or pounds?
Dollars. So
Oh,
so
okay.
those figures are in dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, the figure we had was $100 million. So, that's what sources told us. So that's significant. That is huge. But then he did have all these years of his contract that he's obviously not going to get paid for. So that's what the negotiations were around. But then you're right. The other key factor was having cut that contract, when can he go working again in Formula One? And it does sound from various reports and people close to him that he does want to get back into Formula One. And it looks like spring next year, he's going to be completely able to join any project he wants. But I think with Horner, he'll want to go in on the next step up. So I don't think he's happy just going back in as a team principal. Maybe if it was someone like Ferrari, he'd do it. But of course, Ferrari have just signed a new contract with Fred Vasseur. So I think he'd have to go in as a shareholder and as part of a wider project. That's what Toto Wolff is at Mercedes, for example. Toto owns 33.3% of the Mercedes Formula One team. And I think that's always irked Horner slightly when they were the two great rivals in Formula One, that they had the same role kind of, but Toto had financial skin in the game as well. So I think that's the next step for Horner. And then if you look at the opportunities then, the only one that could really come about is probably Alpine, if the Renault Group decide to sell Alpine and a consortium of bidders from somewhere come in and they put Horner in that role, potentially as an investor or potentially with shares, as part of his payment for coming in. But these things aren't unheard of. Adrian Newey, once he left Red Bull, when he went to Aston Martin, that was with a minority shareholding in the Formula One team. So I think that's probably what Horner has on his mind.
What about Cadillac?
It's a Cadillac have basically come out and said that's not happening. So I would be very surprised. Also for Christian, that would be a big project because you're coming in right at the back of the grid. Graham Loudon has been there building that team up. I just don't really see how Christian would fit into that fold for a number of reasons. So yeah, I honestly think like the Alpine rumors are the strongest, but a few things still need to come together for that to happen. The question then is that if that doesn't come together, does Christian want to find another way in? Is there another way into F1 for him? How else could he be a part of it? So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next year or so. But from what people are saying, it does sound like he's keen to get back involved in some form.
I did enjoy what Toto Wolff said about how he misses his rival. And it made me think a little bit, obviously Drive to Survive has been such a massive part in the growth and sort of fan development of this sport. And part of that has been the the back and forth between the team principals and learning their personalities a little bit, and the drama, the show, even if it is at times mildly manufactured. The idea kind of popped into my mind of, we don't have Gunther Steiner anymore in that world. And it's the team principal group is it's kind of, not, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's boring, but it's not as entertaining as it once was. Is there still a need for him? Is there like a legit need? Like, is Formula One better if Christian Horner is in the mix?
Well, I think it is better when you have those big characters running the teams, but there's been a real trend towards engineers stepping up into these team principal roles. And not to say all engineers are boring, but they do look at problems in a different way, and they're not as adversarial in the way they go about doing their business. So just guys like Laurent Mekies, he's not going to go out and kind of like put quotes in the media just to try and upset Toto, just to try and get something back around from Toto. And so now we're kind of, we have a situation where it's a lot of engineers heading up teams. You still got Zach Brown at McLaren, who's not afraid to speak his mind, and long may that continue. And then you've got Toto at Mercedes, but those are CEO roles as well. So I wonder whether if Christian does come back, it's with a team in a CEO role. And it'll be interesting which way the sport goes, because for years it was really important to have somebody who could hold their own in arguments and put forward their team's position, because that was the way the sport was run. When Bernie Ecclestone was run it, he used to pitch everybody against everybody else. The way Liberty run the sport now, with Stefano Domenicali as the boss, it's a much more friendly approach. It's like, how can we build this together? How can we grow together? And actually, for the health of the sport, it's been far better. Formula One is in a much healthier space than it ever was when everyone was going behind each other's backs. But it does take away some of the entertainment value. But I think it also does take away the need to have someone like Christian, if you're looking at it from a team perspective, to have someone like Christian fighting your corner, if so much of it is agreed upon and everyone's in it together. But from a journalist point of view and from a storytelling point of view and from a survive point of view, I could not agree with you more. Like, guys like Christian are essential. And I think that is important for the health of the sport going forward as well. You want to turn on your TV and you want to hear opinions when people speak out. You want to hear team bosses get angry when things happen on track. 2021 would not have been anywhere near as entertaining. It would still have been entertaining, but it wouldn't have been as entertaining without Toto Wolff and Christian Horner as the two team bosses there. And then poor Michael Massey, I don't know if I should say that, but poor Michael Massey in the middle of the FIA trying to, mediate between the two at times.
He created his own drama.
He did create his own drama in the end. But again, someone who wanted to be at the center of it all, wanted to have a kind of media presence. Michael did want that and kind of went out of his way, and then probably definitely stepped over the line in Abu Dhabi. But that those kind of storylines do create intrigue, they do create interest, they do make this sport fantastic. So hopefully we won't lose too much of it. And from that perspective, I really do hope that we see Christian back in Formula One at some point next year.
I'll talk to you next week before you travel.
Look forward to it.
Wait, Nate's at a wedding this weekend, right? Is it a Tuesday?
Nate's at a wedding right now. Yeah.
Wedding. Let's go.
And he may come back for the next podcast, or we may never see him again. It's hard to know with Nate.
It's hard to find him. Like, throw a dart. My kids are texting me from the other room because they're off of school today, so we're just going to call this now. We can't leave them running around the house completely alone at this point. Thank you for watching or listening. Remember, leave a comment, hit us up with that like. Also, subscribe to the ESPN F1 YouTube channel for all of your ESPN F1 content all season, all year long. 5-star review if you're listening to us somewhere else, wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. See you later.